everyone. In today's video, I will be going over how to make Kiki's dress from Kiki's delivery. This will go through how I drafted the dress and some of the creative thoughts and processes I went through to get from her original dress to this dress. This is actually part one in a two-part Halloween video collection where next week I will go over how to make her bow and her orange bag and any other little accessories I decide to add along the way. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications so that you know when I post a new video. Without further ado, let's get to how I sewed this dress. To start, I needed to draft a pattern. I did this by draping on my dress form. So I took an old bed sheet as some scrap fabric and pinned it to my dress form. I then manipulated, marked, pinned on my fabric until I was happy with my front and back bodice pieces. This does take some time and manipulation and practice if you're not used to using this drafting method. This can also be done on your own body if you don't have a custom dress form like myself. Just ask a friend to help and be careful with the pins. Once I have a rough draft of the front and the back, I temporarily sewed the side seams and the shoulder seams. And then I popped it back on my dress form to see if it was looking like what I had in mind. I was decently happy with the look of it, so I then tried it on myself. The first draft ended up turning out better than I had hoped. I was happy with the fit of it, and there was enough ease in the draft to be able to pull the thing off and on over my head. So I then went ahead and threw together a quick draft of a sleeve. I don't go over how I do this, but I just took a basic sleeve pattern I had from a previous project and widened it to make a puffy sleeve. I'm going to link a video in the description that goes over how to make custom sleeves way better than I ever could. Now that I am happy with how the bodice is constructed, I need to go ahead and make proper pattern pieces for the dress. I took apart the mock-up and laid them down on some plain paper and marked out the pieces. This is also when you want to make any final changes to the pattern, any slight modifications that need to be made that you noticed when trying on the mock-up. Okay, so I can't quite fit the whole pieces in frame, but this is what I have so far for the Kiki dress. This is the bodice front. On a fold, I have one side dart just to account for my chest area. And then I have a mark here which just shows how much of the sleeve will be gathered, because I want the gathering focused more on the top of the shoulder. I don't want it going all the way down the sleeve. You don't want a bunch of bunched up fabric under the arm. And it includes seam allowance, and then this is the back. Super simple. I was gonna add a dart down here, but I decided not to because I'm probably gonna add a strap coming out from this side seam to do a little bow tie in the back, and that will pinch in that little bit of extra fabric that I've taken into account in order to slip the dress over my head. That way I don't have to put a zipper or anything in, especially considering Kiki's dress is quite a loose dress. I'm taking inspiration from that, but obviously adding a little bit more to the dress to make it a little bit more interesting. Speaking of interesting, I have decided to add a bit of a puff sleeve you saw when I was trying on the mock-up. So I decided to shorten it just a little bit from what you saw for the mock-up and add a little bit more at the bottom. So it's a little bit more evenly gathered at the top and at the bottom. And then the last piece is just the little shoulder cuff that'll go along the bottom edge of the sleeve. For my fabric, I have just some simple black satin for the lining, just so that that'll help slip it over my head since it's a slippery fabric. And then I have this sort of velour, blue velour, which is kind of nice, especially since this is a Halloween costume. I'm kind of hoping for it to be more of a bit of a wintry dress that I can wear outside of costuming.
So I'm just cutting out my fabric here. I used my rotary cutter and a cutting mat to do this. I would highly recommend using these if you're working with a slippery fabric, as I am, as it will reduce any distortion in the pieces due to the fabric shifting while you're trying to cut it. But I am biased, as I pretty much cut everything using my rotary cutter.
Okay, so I have all the pieces cut out now. I didn't show you, but I decided to go for a double ruffle on the dress. So I have my first layer, it's about 20 inches long, and then it was just the width of my fabric, which ended up being about 60 inches. I would have liked to it have been a couple inches longer, but this is what we have to work with. And then I cut two pieces, 10 inches long each, and then again the width of the fabric, so each of them are about 60 inches long, and that'll be the second ruffle. And then I have my front bodice, I have my fashion fabric and my lining, I have my back bodice, again fashion and lining, I have my two sleeves, the sleeves will not be lined, and then I have the cuffs for the two sleeves, again also not lined. So now that we have all of this ready to go, we'll start with the darts on both the lining and the bodice and then go from there.
So as I said before, I start with sewing the front darts in the fashion and the lining fabric. Tying off the strings at the end of the darts. And as always, these seams need a good press. As I'm working with velour and satin, I need to be careful when ironing. If you are unsure of what temperature you should have your iron set at, then you should refer to your iron instructions or use a test swatch for ironing before you put your iron on your good piece. There's also a lot of good articles out there for guides on what temperature your iron should be set at for what fabrics. I then went ahead and sewed the side and shoulder seams on the lining fabric. Again, ironing these seams. This can now be set aside for the time being. And then my camera died. So while it was charging, I did some of the boring bits, like sewing the skirt together. I did a simple rolled hem for the bottom edge of the skirt. And French seams for the sides. I then gathered the lower ruffle so it matched the length of the upper skirt piece. I go into how to do this in my ruffle skirt video. This does take quite a bit of time to do, so I got comfy and watched my friend's Twitch stream while pinning and evening out the gathers. Shout out to my friend Danomanik for bringing a childhood favorite like Super Mario 64 back to life for me, and for keeping me sane while I spend way too long perfecting my ruffles. With that done, I can now go ahead and attach the lower skirt to the upper skirt piece. I did this with a simple straight stitch. Once that was done, I went over that seam with my serger to clean up any crazy bits and to tidy up the seam, as this fabric is very prone to fraying and I want this to be a machine washable everyday sort of dress. Once I had that done and pressed, I then went along this seam and sewed down the serged edge so that it doesn't stick out under the skirt. I also managed to find just enough fabric in the scraps to cut and sew 2 side ties. These were approximately 3 inches by 35 inches long. I sewed them in half to a point and then turned them right side out and gave them a press.
Okay, so I'm going to try and explain this here now. So this is the good side of the back of the bodice, and I'm going to put the good side of the front bodice against this, but I want to add in the ties that I just sewed, these guys here, and I think I want them to be along closer to the bottom. So I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it here. I'm gonna give, actually, you know what, no, let's be real, I don't eyeball anything, so let's just measure. I'm gonna go up 2 inches here, put a little mark, and I'm going to take this, and I think I want that to point up like that. So I'll place it there, like that, and then I'm going to take the front of my bodice here, and good side down, so good sides facing each other. I'm going to put this down here, and then I'm going to sew up each side like this, and then I'm also going to do the top shoulders here, sew these together. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so new day. I'm going to show you what I've gotten up to. So I have the top all done now. I gathered the tops of the sleeves and then evenly along the bottom and added a bit of a cuff. So now what we want to do is we want to take the lining that we already sewed and we want to sew the two together along the neckline. And then once that's done, we want to turn it inside out and we want to sew the lining to the shoulder seam here. And then that way the whole bodice will be complete. I serged the edges on the sleeves, so there's no point lining it. And with puff sleeves, I tend to not line them anyway because you have to draft a whole new pattern, and for simplicity's sake, we won't do that. Then once that's done, all that's left to do will be to add the skirt. So we'll sew the skirt fashion to fashion, wrong side, right sides together, turn it inside out, and then sew down the lining so that there's no raw edges, it's nice and clean. And again, we lined this just because this is a little slippery and it'll help slip it over my head because there's no closures on this. All there is a bit of a tie that will pinch in the extra fabric in the back to give it a bit more fitted look. But again, Kiki's dress is not fitted, so we're more taking inspiration. I like ruffles, so I'm gonna add ruffles. So let's get sewing.
Okay, so just to explain again, here I am sewing the lining and the fashion fabric together along the neckline. Once that is sewn, I went ahead and used my pinking shears to trim away the excess fabric. And as always, I gave the seam a good press open and then pressed down.
Oh, okay, so here we are now. I sewed the neckline of the lining to the fashion fabric, and then I ironed it over, and then I just sewed a little seam right along the edge, and that'll just make sure that the lining doesn't try to pop up when you're wearing it. And then I went along the shoulder edges and I just folded this under by the seam allowance, so 5/8 of an, whatever it is, 5/8 of an inch, I think so. And I've just pinned a ton of pins along those edges, and now I'm just gonna sew this up by hand, just have a really nice finished edge. You could machine sew this if you had maybe some less slippery fabric, but I don't really trust this to not shift and move around while I'm trying to sew it under the machine. So it's honestly just easier if I just do it by hand. So I'm just gonna put a good TV show on, make a cup of tea, pull out my needle and thread and just do this up by hand, and then I'll check back in with you after.
With the shoulder seam sewn down by hand, I then went ahead and gathered the top of the skirt down to the same length as the bodice and sewed the two together, right sides facing. Once that was pressed, I again pinned the lining down along that seam and sewed it in by hand. And with that, the dress is now done. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you'd like to see next. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on those notifications so you know when I post a new video. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.